Louise Thompson. Hi, so good to have you on the Comms Futures podcast. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, Natalie. Thank you. It's so good to be here. I'm excited.
Oh, it's really good to connect. So for those listening and watching, this is the first time Louise and I have spoken
Yeah.
to each other kind of face to face, but I feel like we already have a strong partnership because you were kind enough to sponsor one of the Reimagine series events, which I'm super grateful for, and it was such a great alignment with the work that you do.
Yeah, and I think what you're doing with the Reimagine series in particular is really meaningful and really needed because we need to have more of these conversations. And I think comms professionals in general just need to think a bit more deeply about how is our work being seen? How is it valuable? How are we articulating the value of this versus kind of just being helpful, which is kind of one of my pet hates is, we're not just being helpful, we actually have strategic value to offer, but we need to work a bit harder, ironically, on communicating that to others. So yeah, I love those types of conversations and are very happy to support.
So, I know we're going to have so much to talk about because one of the things that I'm really passionate about is helping communications leaders convey their value and not expecting the work to speak for itself, right? And figuring out, whether it's as individuals or as teams, how do we measure and convey our impact? And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because I see you really pushing comms leaders to think about that and really to figure out, okay, how do we connect the value of our work to business outcomes, which I think is so, so important. So if you could just tell the audience a little bit about the work you do and how you came to do it and kind of how you think about it and approach it.
Well, a lot of my work now as a leadership coach, so I'm a leadership and careers coach for senior communications professionals. A lot of my work is informed by all of the mistakes that I made in my corporate career. So I was a communications leader for more than 20 years in the UK and in the States as well. I lived in San Francisco for many very happy years and have lots of stories about working in Silicon Valley, but that might be for another podcast. But I made a ton of mistakes and I had a coach a point at which I was taking up my first board level director of communications role. And it was a role where I took it and I knew that I was technically brilliant at comms. That's not a brag. It was evidenced in my career and my accomplishments. I was really, really good at doing comms. What I wasn't so good at was being a leader of a communications team and function for an organization. And there is a massive difference between the two. And that's what I see when I coach so many people now. Brilliant, functional, technical communications professionals. But no one really kind of teaches you how to lead when you go into that leadership position, perhaps for the first time, or it's the first time that you are sat around that table. So I kind of fell headlong into that trap, I think, and I made a lot of mistakes. I was seen as kind of helpful but not valuable. I didn't really know how to articulate the strategic value of communications around that board table. I kind of assumed or thought that my work or my team's work would speak for itself, as you said earlier. It didn't, because guess what? Board leaders aren't comms people. They don't need to be. They're business leaders or organizational leaders, and they need you to speak in that language. But nobody had ever kind of pulled me aside and told me that. So luckily, my organization at the time was very supportive. They wanted to support my leadership development and me in that role. They paired me up with a leadership coach who was brilliant. And that really changed my career. It transformed my leadership confidence, my impact. And then several years later, I went on to retrain as a coach because it had done so much for me and opened my eyes. And I really wanted to help other comms professionals with the same types of support and same opportunities that I was lucky enough to have through that coaching.
Oh, that's fantastic. And so how long have you been doing the coaching?
About 4 years. So I was probably that classic case. I think there are many of us around that after the pandemic, and I was 44, which I will talk about. I will bore anyone that listens. I'm now 48. 44 is one of those classic ages where, especially if you're a woman, the aging process kind of drastically speeds up. And it's also when you kind of hit perimenopause, typically, all this stuff starts happening. And for me, that coincided with post pandemic. I had been a director of comms for a company that was doing, still does, amazing work in logistics, but they were supporting our National Health Service in England through the pandemic. Very tough. I'm very proud of the work that I did, but I was ready for something different. So I started after the pandemic about 4 years ago, and now 4 years in, I do one-to-one coaching, I do group programs, I do leadership workshops, you name it. But I love it, and as you will know, entrepreneurship is a different journey, but I'm loving
Yep.
it so far. Yeah,
Yeah, totally. I was just talking to someone about this morning, actually. It's, for me, my background is in nonprofit comms primarily. And in those roles, I felt that those were very kind of risk-averse environments, and I would argue necessarily so,
yeah,
right? We were always mulling over every single word, trying to think about all of the 10 different ways that a sentence or a message could be
yes,
interpreted, right? And now, as an entrepreneur, I have to have such a bias towards action, and I'm not really used to that, right?
correct.
And
Yes.
so it's all about testing and experimenting and shipping things before I'm really comfortable with putting them out there. But that's just the nature of the work. And do you relate to that at all?
Oh, totally. And a lot of comms leaders, as and I know, that's kind of part of the value that we bring when we're leading communications is that we are very thoughtful, very intentional. Not that we're not as entrepreneurs, but as you say, there has to be a bias towards action and momentum, and done is better than perfect and all of that type of thing. And interestingly, those are some of the things that I try and weave into my coaching with senior comms professionals in terms of don't overthink what you're doing or second guess it all of the time. And a lot of comms people, I imagine you were like this. I was definitely like this. We are perfectionists. And, we will sit there and worry about the choice, as you said, of a single word for hours or days, sometimes before hitting send on that email. But actually, often it is about how can we move things forward. And one of the reasons I love coaching is also very, there is a bias towards action. So I often say to people, it can be and often is very therapeutic. It's not therapy. I'm not a mental health professional. It's about action. It's about identifying what's going to move you closer to your goals. And actually, my business, having my own business now, I think has helped me because I now really understand the benefits of doing that, and I can translate that to my clients even though they might be in a different kind of career or organizational space. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, and also in addition to that, we have obviously this skill set of comms and PR, and we can apply it to our own businesses, which I think is so cool. We can do the comms and PR for our own brands, which is something I just am really enjoying, and I'm always
Yeah,
trying to make more time for that, right? Isn't that
I
fun?
know. Yeah, it's so fun, but and again, another thing no one tells you when you're starting a business. There's all these little secrets in the world of business and careers is that marketing your own business takes up so much of your time, and it needs to, but you have got to put the time in, you've got to put the shifts in to do it, and you have to show up. And you do so much great work on LinkedIn. I am a later in life TikTok creator. I do a lot of stuff on TikTok. So I have a load of leadership and careers advice on there. I absolutely love it. But you've got to put it in, you've got to put the reps in, you have to be consistent, you have to show up, you have to think about your brand, how you're showing up. And again, that's a lot of the stuff that I work with comms people on, because ironically, and I'm sure this will resonate with you, we're the ones usually advising organizations, leaders on reputation, personal branding, positioning, thought leadership. Yet we don't think about it for ourselves when we're in a corporate position or on the career track. Again, we kind of tend to default to my work will speak for itself. And it's such a, I think it's such a harsh lesson to learn that it doesn't. I would say particularly for women, not exclusively for women, but particularly for women, we often believe or are led to believe, just keep your head down, do a good job, and that's enough. And then we watch other, perhaps more confident people who are ready to take the opportunities, put their hands up, ask for those opportunities, position themselves, make themselves visible, ask for what they want. And then we're like, oh, that's not fair. But you have to do
Mhm.
it. You have to think about the way that you are perceived and what people think of you if you want to have a really kind of meaningful and sustained career in comms, particularly in this jobs market.
Mhm. Yeah, we think about this stuff, I think, quite similarly because I've really kind of fallen into doing some coaching with comms consultants and executives on how to position themselves, build their personal
Hmm.
brand and online presence on LinkedIn. And it really is this idea of like the cobbler's children have no shoes. And it really kind of riles me up
Yes.
because comms people are so uniquely equipped to do personal branding really well, but it goes for the most part, speaking generally, it goes against our nature because we're used to being behind the scenes, not being the story, right? And to your point, I mean, there is sort of a therapeutic aspect to this coaching of helping people align their
Mm.
skill set with what their needs are as a professional so that if they get laid off at some point, they show up in person really well, but their LinkedIn is covered in cobwebs.
It's the gap, as you said, between, I think, in comms, we are often kind of taught that we're not the story. You stay behind the camera. You're kind of shaping things behind the scenes. But actually, in two scenarios. Scenario A, you need to look for a new role in what is an incredibly tough jobs market. Even at the senior end, there are so many fantastic senior comms professionals on the market, sadly, right now. You have to think about your network and your brand before you need them, exactly as you said, so people don't get to your LinkedIn and on the one hand they've got your resume which has got fantastic experience, they go to your LinkedIn and it's like a ghost town, you're not engaging, you don't tell people kind of where your value is, how you help organizations, all that kind of good stuff. And then if you're in a role as well and you want to progress to that leadership position, you kind of want to take your seat around that senior leadership table, the SLT, the exec team, the board, it's about realizing that you have to step out from behind the scenes. You have to be a visible, valued leader. You have to think about your values. You have to think about your leadership identity, the impact that you want to have on people around you, because it's not just the work that you do anymore, it's the people that you lead and it's your behaviors and all that kind of stuff. So it's not frivolous. And, my kind of running joke is, personal brands, it's not just for social media influencers, it's a really serious business, career, and leadership development tool. And you have to think about it that way and then go about it in a way that is considered, intentional, purposeful, all those good things.
Mm. Absolutely. Louise, I'd love to hear more about your coaching and how you approach it. I feel like, at a high level, I have an understanding of how you think about it, but could you walk us through what the coaching looks like and what you really focus on when you work with clients?
Can. So I feel really fortunate actually. So I think I mentioned before that for many years, I lived and worked in San Francisco. I worked from like 2006 to 2013. Um, there was a lot going on in tech, worked with a ton of amazing startups and agencies. And then I moved back to the UK. So now my client base is pretty global. I have a lot of clients in the States, a lot in Europe, across Africa and the UK. And in all of those sessions, what's fascinating to me is that all around the world, senior comms professionals are faced with the same types of challenges and opportunities for their leadership development and their careers. So I do see kind of common themes everywhere. So for me as a coach, it is about sitting with a person and letting them have that safe space. Obviously, it has to be safe, has to be confidential. Um, really identifying what someone's goals are and then giving them the space and the time and what I would call a very supportive level of challenge through questions, because I am known as a fairly challenging coach, but very supportive. But I will challenge you. So if you work with me, that's kind of what you get, um, to really identify what's holding me back. Where are my blockers? Why am I feeling kind of on the outside of this leadership team? Why don't I feel as credible as my other functional peers? Why aren't I getting the same kind of respect or kind of strategic recognition that perhaps the CMO is getting, or the director of finance? All of those things, even down to kind of the most fundamental, which is, who am I as a leader and who do I want to be? So coaching is about that kind of safe space where you've got time and space to reflect on it. And I will ask you the right questions to really help you identify, and sometimes, confront and sit with, oh, that's what I'm doing. Oh, that's who I am. Okay. Oh, that's what it's like to be led by me. Oh, I don't like that. Okay. How can I start changing it? And then it's about identifying actions with lots of coaching kind of theory and frameworks to help move you forward. Because as we talked about at the beginning of this, of our chat, coaching is very action focused. You need to be able to identify actions that you can take out of those coaching sessions and into your world, into your role, try them out, see if they work. So a great example for me is helping senior comms people navigate challenging senior stakeholders. So you have to be able to then go and have a conversation with one of them and try out some of the things that you've identified might help. You bring those back to coaching. So I do that in a one-to-one setting. I run a group program twice a year as well. That's about to start again in September. So I do all of these things to help comms people really become the leaders that I know they can be, and they know they can be as well. They just need a bit of support and challenge to help them get there.
I love that. And what, in your experience, are some of the common themes or threads as far as what holds people back, or why are people in comms feeling like they're not respected as much as, to your point, the director of finance or the CMO? I mean, what's going on there?
I think it's such a great question, because there's such a blend of things going on. But I think a couple of them high level are, I think in general, there is a lot of imposter syndrome, imposter thoughts, whatever you want to call it. That kind of stuff definitely goes on. Unfortunately, that is often coupled with self-limiting beliefs. And if you've got those self-limiting beliefs, well, I'm not as credible as the director of finance, or no one really listens to me when I speak in this meeting. The really unfortunate thing, those are going to become self-limiting behaviors, which is what I always talk about. So if you don't believe that you are listened to in meetings, your behavior is going to become that you never speak up in meetings. And then that's obviously this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, unfortunately, of you being the quiet one and everybody else adding the value, shaping the discussion. So there's a lot of that goes on. I think there is a lot of us as comms professionals, and I still count myself as one, we struggle with a lot of kind of limiting stereotypes around the strategic value of our function, of our roles. So there is a lot of, unfortunately, still perception or bias that comes just, it's not a business function, you can't measure it, it's not strategic, where's the ROI, all of that kind of stuff. It goes on in our own heads, but yeah, it does go on in the heads of other leaders as well. It does. So we have to really think about that. So I'd say those are kind of two of the big things that I really help people understand and unpack. Is there's a lot that you can do as an individual to think about how you want to reshape that narrative through your behaviors, through your language, through your presence, through the way, as you said, I think earlier in our conversation, about the way that we tie our communications work to business outcomes, to impact. Because again, that's another trap that we fall into. We're measuring comms for the sake of comms. It's not telling us anything about how it's impacting the organization or helping a business move forward which is absolutely essential if you want to be taken seriously at that top table.
Yeah, and it's this idea, I think, of going from comms people as order takers, right, to actually
Yes,
strategic
yeah.
functions in an organization. And for me, I know that that was a real mindset shift of, oh, we are no
Mm.
one's assistants, right? We are not assistants
Mhm.
to the policy team or the development
Yep,
team, right? We
yep,
are our own strategic function, and instead of just saying yes to every new project idea that comes to our desk, let's actually ask questions and think through and push back to
yeah.
better understand like what is the real purpose of why we're doing that, right?
Yeah, it's so important. It's another God, it's another one of my bugbears. I'll get on my high horse about it. But it's like being busy, it is not a sign or a signal that you are doing valuable work. It's a trap. It's a trap that we fall into. You know, we see being busy and being helpful as well. We're doing our jobs where people are going to really value us because we're always so busy. So it must mean we're doing important work. And we're really helpful because a lot of people in comms are people pleasers. So we're helping everybody. It doesn't matter what it is. We're there and we're working longer and harder than a lot of people and we're exhausted, but we're still helping. But actually, often we're working on the wrong stuff. And because we are so deep in that busy trap, we are not working on the stuff that is perhaps doesn't feel as urgent, but it's the stuff that is going to move the needle. And I think for me, that's psychologically as a comms person, again, I've got 20 years of experience doing it myself. We are often people that we thrive in a crisis and we thrive on urgency. But actually, you can get so used to that and you kind of almost get the dopamine hit of feeling needed in that moment that actually, when that moment has passed and you're like, well, there isn't a crisis to manage now, but there is a really strategically important narrative to start shaping and developing and doing the hard yards with people on. It's not as sexy, it's not as exciting because there's no associated kind of dopamine hit with it, and you just got to sit down and focus and move this forward, and it's a different thing. And I think we often really, I know I really struggled with that because I thought that if I wasn't like, okay, in there dealing with a crisis, yep, then I wasn't being effective. But actually, some of that important work that isn't as urgent is the stuff that ultimately is going to shift things in a positive way. So we've got to learn to invest our time accordingly, which I think can be tricky as well.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing really is a fast track to resentment for a lot of communications professionals, right? If we're
Yeah.
constantly thinking, "Oh,
Yeah.
the work will speak for itself and I'm working so hard,
Yeah.
but I'm not really seeing the payoff." And yeah,
Hmm.
I just relate to that so
Yeah.
much. I'm curious too when we're talking about measuring the impact of our work in comms and connecting it to business outcomes practically, what does that look like from your perspective? How do you think about it in terms of what things should we be measuring and how should a comms leader approach this? How do you advise
I
them?
think there's one very basic question that a lot of us don't think to ask when we're new in a role or when we're in a new leadership role. You can ask it at any time, which is really understanding from your peers, from the leaders, whoever you report to, what does success really look like for me and for the communications function of this organization? So describe it to me, describe to me how you'll all feel, what things will look like, how things will be different and better for our organization if we're getting the comms strategy right. And that is a really powerful, open question and discussion to have. And we often don't have it because immediately we go down the rabbit hole of, objectives and KPIs and measurement. And we're going to come to that because obviously all that's really important. But you've got to start there because that is I don't know if this is your experience with kind of very senior leaders and C-suite, but it's certainly mine. That of course, measurement and ROI is critical. We need to do a much better job of that in communications. However, it is often about a visceral experience that a C-suite member will have when they think about communications. That is, and it's very hard actually for them to articulate it, which is why we have to use all our skills to kind of pull it out of them. But that's how you know. And they will find it hard to articulate, but you've got to give them cues and prompts and kind of help them shape it. You know, does it mean that there will be fewer reputational crises because you've got me in your corner looking around those corners and helping you mitigate them or minimize them? Does it mean that you will be able to see and feel our marketing and communications working hand in hand with what a marketing team is saying, and the reputation that we have as a company and all that kind of stuff? You've got to kind of start there. So once you know what success then looks like, you can then obviously go to best practice in terms of communications measurement, which is to focus on the outcomes, not just the outtakes of communications activity. What outcomes are we here to support? And I will often get the question from my clients, well, we're not marketing. We're not, because we're earned most of the time or owned, we can't necessarily ascribe, a dollar amount in terms of ROI, or we can't pull the data that marketing could pull in terms of our ROI or effectiveness. And yes, that is often true. But what you should always be able to do is show a correlation. There should be a positive correlation between the work that you do and what matters to the company. The other thing, of course, is understanding what matters to the company. And again, amazing how often we don't necessarily understand that in the way that we need to. So I've often had director of comms roles where I've been responsible for everything external, internal. So I'll use an internal comms example linked with employee engagement. If you think about those measures, it's actually about how our work supports engagement, motivation, morale, productivity, sick leave, employee churn, all of that stuff. Those are often the measures that really, really count. And no, we can't necessarily prove, that yes, if we do this here, that results here. You should be able to see that correlation between the work that we're doing and positive trends in those areas. So that's what I always kind of talk to people about, is focus on the graphs going the right way and understand what matters and focus on those outcomes and how you're then going to articulate how your work is supporting those outcomes.
Mm. I love that. One of the themes that we hit on in that Reimagine event on invisible comms work is that so often, and I think this is especially the case with internal comms, is that so often our success is when nothing happens. Right? And that's certainly not
Yeah,
always the
yeah.
case, but a lot of the times, if there's a real kind of shakeup in the organization and the comms team is getting ahead of it and trying to manage and protect brand reputation and mitigate
Mm.
risk, oftentimes when nothing happens, that's a success. And how
Yeah.
strange to have to wrap our heads around that. And I think the way you're describing it
Yeah.
as correlation is really useful there, because that is something that's really, really hard to measure when success is kind of that nothing bad happens, right?
Yeah, it's such a good point. It's such a good point, and it's why one of the exercises that I will often recommend to new comms leaders who are struggling to kind of figure out, okay, how can I really, what's a really value add activity that I can do with my board or with my senior leadership team that shows that I have strategic value? Often I will suggest that risk mapping exercise. So you, the comms leader, are leading it because it's about reputational risk. And you plot these out. So the classic kind of risk axes of likelihood of it happening and impact to the company if it does happen. And then you get everybody to identify what they are most worried about happening over the next 12, to 24 months. You obviously focus on that cluster in the top right-hand corner. Okay, these are the things that we're most worried about because they're more likely than others to happen. If they happen, they're going to be really bad. And then you've immediately got your set of, okay, we're going to prepare for these. Now, the step further I always advise is of course, what you need to do is go away and develop a crisis comms reputational risk playbook from that exercise. Of course, you need to do that. But what if you could do more than that as an organizational leader and then lead a conversation or a discussion about any of these risks that we've identified today? Can we prevent any of them happening? And if so, what's the leadership discussion and decision that we need to make or start thinking about making in order to do that? To your point, so that actually nothing happens, because we can help you prepare for stuff happening, and that's the playbook. But as a leader, how about if we work on mitigation or prevention altogether? Not always possible, of course, but sometimes it is. And it's only possible because you've led that senior discussion that has surfaced some of those things and got people thinking about it that way. So it's a good example of what I recommend to people if they're kind of struggling for credibility at that senior level as a comms person.
That sounds like such a useful exercise. I really love that. In this vein of leading the conversation and steering the ship in that way,
Mm.
I suspect that, tell me if I'm wrong, but I suspect that you talk with clients about this idea of too many decision makers, too many cooks in the kitchen. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is this idea that so many people think because they can write or because they can draft a message that they are a comms professional,
Mm.
and I hear this gripe
Yes,
amongst comms pros a lot, that kind of everyone thinks they can, like, outside of comms, thinks they can do the
of
comms
course.
role and that they're an
Yep.
expert in it. Well, how the
Yes.
heck do you approach that and advise people on how to think about that? Because it's so easy to have the direct, in like a C-suite level meeting, having the director of finance
Mm.
opining on what the message should be for the organizational shakeup or whatever it might be.
Yeah. It's a brilliant point because you're right, it comes up so often, and you can only imagine, although as I definitely advocate getting yourself involved in broader discussions beyond comms. So if you're sat around the board table, you should have a view on finances, but obviously you're never going to go up to the director of finance and say, if I were you, based on my copious, years of finance experience, which are nothing, maybe I've just, run my college budget in the right way or whatever, I would do this. Like, you would never do that. But everybody does it for comms because everybody can do comms. Everyone communicates. We're all great communicators. Makes me mad. However, showing your frustration and being frustrated is not a productive path forward. So I always start with understanding. So for me, curiosity and empathy are two massively underrated leadership skills, regardless of what you are a leader in. But obviously, we're talking about communications professionals. Start by understanding your stakeholders. Get curious about where they're coming from, what matters to them, what are they worried about. Show some empathy if they come to you and they're like, well, I really think we should say this. It's about understanding why and then showing some empathy with the fact that, yeah, I'd be worried about that too. Obviously, they're expressing it perhaps not in the best way, but I can take that sentiment and I can work with it. So it's about kind of sitting down with these people. And of course, the more you know your senior stakeholders, the better. So you've got to invest your time there. And then having a discussion with them and saying, what I'm hearing is this. So what I would recommend is that we take this. I'm going to talk to some other peers or colleagues as well. And then I will take this away and I will work this up into, a strategic narrative that we're all really happy with, that kind of hits those points that you are concerned with or are thinking about, that also reflects, our organizational narrative and our communication strategy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it often comes down to those conversations. And I have specifically with directors of finance had those conversations. They're often kind of the more challenging ones. I don't know why, but I think often once you do sit down with them, they're like, oh, great. You've got it handled, Louise. Fantastic. It was just in their head. They needed to get it out. You've helped them. You've been curious. You've guided them. You've understood. Okay, let me take it away. I'll do what I'm great at now. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that's great. In those cases, I think maybe it is about showing people outside of comms, no, I am serious about making sure this organization can thrive. I'm not just here to make people feel good, to make employees feel
Yeah.
included. That's a part of it, but this is really at the end of the day about the bottom line, and I understand that. And I think to your point, sometimes people outside of comms just need to hear us say that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. And I'm thinking about it now because we're talking about kind of directors of finance. And, I have, as I'm sure many people that will be listening to this have led so many internal campaigns around efficiencies, cost reductions, productivity, et cetera, et cetera. And that, obviously has come from those types of conversations and showing that we understand what's important to the organization and then being able to translate that to people and have our colleagues at large that we're communicating with understand why it's so important as well. Because I think that's the bit that we're so good at, and that's where we can really shine as well as organizational leaders is occasionally. Again, I'm picking on directors of finance here, but they might have the view that it doesn't really matter that people understand why we're doing it. They just need to understand that we need to do it, that they need to do it. But actually, where we need to come in, they do need to understand why and what's in it for them and what's in it for the organization and why it matters. Otherwise, they won't do anything. They won't take action. So that's kind of where our skill set comes in often.
Yeah, I mean, such a superpower of comms professionals is that we can
Yeah.
really influence people's behavior, right? And we have the ability. I think that's really what our work is about at the end of the day is to craft a message and identify channels through which to put these messages out that ultimately encourage and encourage people to act in a way that we want them to act.
Yeah. And if you think about, I mean, I think about my last director of comms role before I launched my coaching business. We talked about it earlier. It was during the pandemic, and it was vitally important, obviously, as I'm sure it was for every single organization, that our employees understood what we were doing to keep them safe and why, but also what they needed to do to kind of keep their side of the bargain and why. And it was actually this kind of amazing social contract that we all entered into to keep each other safe. And it was really, it's obviously a catastrophic thing and a tragedy, but on a purely kind of comms level, it was quite a beautiful kind of compact that we had. So we're like, okay, this is what we're doing and this is what you're doing, and bring those things together. And we're going to keep each other as safe as possible and keep the organization, the business going. And here's why that's so important to you and to our customers, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I think it is one of our superpowers, and we need to remember that more in those challenging types of conversations with perhaps other non-comms leaders.
Mhm. I'm curious, Louise, what
Mm.
you think is important for comms leaders to do or understand over the next maybe 5 or 10 years. And I'm not asking you to predict the future, but I am curious to hear the trajectory that you see things going in and what skill sets and mindsets maybe that comms leaders need to have to be successful.
It's a really great question. Um, One of the things that in general I talk about a lot as a coach is the importance of having a growth mindset. And I think for communications professionals, it's imperative that whatever stage we're at in our careers, whether we're job searching, whether we're in a career, whether we're senior at the start of our careers, mid, whatever, we have to have a growth mindset, which is this understanding that, our capabilities and our abilities are not fixed at a point in time. They can and will always evolve and improve if we want them to, and if we put ourselves to work to achieve it. And that maybe let's take a skill like AI, for example, we might not understand it yet. And that's the phrase, isn't it? We're not there yet. Um, but if I take this course or if I start applying it in these small ways and if I experiment and if I'm open to the opportunities, then I will have a mastery of it, that will see me, serve me well in my career. I just need to kind of put myself in that mind frame, mindset. So that a growth mindset, I think, is vitally important for whatever stage you're at in your career. I think some of the we're talking about AI, and obviously there's so much chat about AI. We know that in the age of AI, it really will be those other skills that will help set us apart. So thinking about things that AI can't yet do. So things like, all of the context awareness we have to bring to situations, pulling strategic insights, that whole thing around curiosity and empathy as leaders. So that human connection piece, all of those things are going to be really, really important because obviously what we'll see, and we're seeing it now, it's kind of a lot of the base level activities. Yeah, we can speed those things up and AI can kind of do a pretty good run at those things for us. What else have we got that needs to layer into that to really bring it to life or to refine it or to show that we're able to be strategic around that table? And that is much more about your leadership strengths and skills than it is your functional ones, actually. So I think that's kind of the area is working on your leadership skills. Even if you don't end up wanting to kind of be a director or a CCO, it will still serve you well because it's going to help you in a better position relative, to what's happening in the world of AI.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a huge premium on storytelling right now and having
Yeah.
a really good foundation and expertise in that, which comms people do for the most part.
Mm,
I feel that we as a
mm,
profession are quite well equipped for kind of the future of work and that's really exciting to me
yeah.
because whether to your point the relationship building, I mean all of these things that we're really good at, that we can leverage AI to do our work well, and we can continue to kind of tap into these skills that we've spent our careers building, that AI really hasn't mastered yet, right? I'm curious, talking a little bit about personal brand and how you've built your own brand.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about what that journey has looked like for you? I know a lot of comms professionals, and I've certainly been there, is we struggle to put ourselves out there. It feels a little bit cringy, right? To
Mm,
to post about our own
yeah.
work. And we've touched on this a little bit, but what has your journey been like with that? Have you experienced that yourself, and how have you overcome those challenges and mental blocks?
I definitely have. So I would say as a comms professional, um, like most comms people, I was never that good at it. That did start to change for me, I will say, when I moved to the States. So I moved to the States, I'm 48 now, moved to the States when I was 29, I think. And actually, um, this is not going to be a conversation about US work styles versus UK ones, because that's a whole other discussion. However, one of the things I learned in the States was kind of the power of self advocacy and asking for what you want and asking for what you deserve, which we don't do very
Mm,
well in England. We really, really don't. We're very shy and retiring when it comes to asking for what we want at work, not so much in the States. So I really learned a ton from that. So that kind of started me on my journey, and I started to be more confident internally and then started to translate that externally. For me, obviously, the big pivot came when I launched my own business, and it's an obvious one for people because, as we talked about, you need to market your own business, otherwise, you're not going to have a business. Um, so so I do a lot on LinkedIn, but I found my spiritual home in TikTok, which sounds a bit weird because I am nearly 50. Um, I had my own preconceptions challenged about who was on TikTok. Um, a lot of very senior people are on TikTok. A lot of my dream clients are on TikTok. And I started doing videos there about 18 months ago. My first videos were cringe and awful, but it's like anything. And this is what I say to anyone who's worried about their personal brand or kind of it's a bit ick. You have to get through that. You have to start and you have to keep showing up. And obviously, my videos got better and better. Now Frankly, I'm so comfortable. I did a TikTok last week from the south of France in my swimming costume, my bathing suit, and I was like, it's fine. No makeup, it's absolutely fine. I've got something I want to say, I'm going to say it. Um, so
Yep.
I have now got really, really comfortable with showing up, but it was a journey for me. And I had to do it every day until I got to that point where I was comfortable. And I think where a lot of people fall down in their personal brand is that they won't commit and they won't be consistent. So you'll have people that will say, okay, I did an Instagram post today. And then I think, yeah, I'm going to do another one in 2 weeks' time. And then we'll see how that goes. And I'm like, that ain't going to work. You've got to show up every single day and commit. That's what you do on LinkedIn. That's what I do. And so many other people do on LinkedIn, on TikTok, wherever. The bravery it takes to do that and to show up is quite something. Obviously, to put yourself out there. So that's one of the other kind of blocks and barriers that I work with a lot of people on. Again, let's bring it back to comms people who are often very uncomfortable because they've been told they're not the story. How can I be the story without seeming completely self-serving, egotistical? For me, particularly on LinkedIn, how can I provide value? How can I provide some professional value here to my network? Sometimes that's about me promoting my services because those are of professional value to the people that follow me. Sometimes it's about sharing my insights, coaching advice, my own experiences, my stories of my communications career, perhaps where I got things wrong, my thoughts on a situation or a topic. How can I provide value? And I think when you look through that lens as well, that shift becomes a bit easier. So that's where I ask my clients to start. Focus on providing professional value, be consistent and be committed, and then you will bloom and you'll see these opportunities and then it will kind of go from there.
Yeah, that's great. And this idea that we can bring value in all kinds of ways, I think so much
Mm,
of the content that really performs well is kind of this peek behind the curtain of here's how I'm
mm,
approaching, running my business, or here is behind the scenes view of how I did this project and what were the challenges and what were the failures, and being kind of authentic about that is
mhm,
really great. So yeah, I love that way of thinking about it. And sometimes I find that with my clients, the term personal brand is a bit overwhelming or kind of a turnoff. But I
yeah.
encourage them to think of it as learning out loud, like sharing what they're learning, because I think comms
Mm,
professionals generally are extremely curious and constantly learning new things. And so that's one way I like to
yeah.
think about it. Louise, before we wrap up, I want to make sure that you
Mm,
have a chance to talk about what you're up to as we approach the fall and what the rest of this year is
yeah.
looking like for you, and how people could work with you.
Great. So I'm launching my group coaching program. It's cohort 4. So it's the fourth time I've run it. It's called the Confident Communications Leader. Starts again on September the 23rd. It's a 10-week group coaching programs. I always say it's for new and aspiring comms leaders. So it is not for those at the start of their career. If you are very close to your first leadership role or in it, it's for you. It's a very supportive community. We talk through a lot of the topics that we've talked about today, and more. So you can find more about that on my website, which is louisethompsoncoaching.com. I'm doing a lot more speaking, actually. One of those things for me getting out of my comfort zone this year was doing more speaking. So I'm doing leadership workshops, and my daughter is starting high school in September. So personally, that is a big focus just to make sure that all goes well. But yeah, that's where you can find me. My website. I'm on TikTok at Lead with Louise. If people are into TikTok, there's a ton of stuff I do on there as well.
Great, great. Well, Louise, it was such a pleasure to meet you. I really feel a camaraderie with you and a connection to you because I
I
think
know,
we really
same.
attack similar challenges. It's really been great to chat
Yeah.
and hear more about your work and how you're helping the comms community.
Oh, thank you, Natalie. I have thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed it. And likewise, yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks so much for joining the podcast, and I know we'll keep in touch. And I'm excited to see how you continue to support comms professionals. So thank you.